Thank you, Craig. Um, Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this Purple Line CMC Corridor Management Committee. I'm Charlie Zelle, chair of the committee, but also chair of Met Council. And before we begin, we always have to start with a little housekeeping. Please keep your camera on if you're speaking, especially if you're speaking. We remind everyone to mute yourself if you're not speaking, and we can use the raise hand feature and chat. Hopefully those are working. The meeting is recorded, so for those that miss it, or if you want to review, we're going to have it posted on our websites along with the meeting agendas, presentation materials, summaries, all that's posted on the Purple Line. Kind of has its own little website. That's metrotransit.org/purple-line-project-committees, and that will be in the chat or in the there it is on the agenda or on the page in front of us, the presentation. So please feel free to check that out. So today we're going to have some reports from the Business Advisory Committee along with the Community Advisory Committee. We're going to hear about outreach, engagement as always, and most importantly, Craig's going to take us through the route modification study, phase 2. So that is exciting and almost borderline technical, but pretty critical for our consideration. And I think a lot has happened. Really, it feels like we just met, but that was a month ago, and we have had a lot going on, including the legislative session. And this past legislative session did a lot for transit. I'm really happy to report a number of things, and maybe most notably a 3/4 cent sales tax on the metro area, of which 83% is going to the council to help fund the transit system. We were facing a structural deficit. Now looks like we have the funds to cover all operations, including those parts of transit ways that were previously funded by counties. And 17% of that sales tax is going to counties, 5% going to active transportation, and we are actually very excited that this allows not only for the operation of a network, but will really address a deferred capital maintenance. In other words, once we build these transitways, we want to keep them in top shape. And so this is a very long term vision. There was bonding funds for arterial bus rapid transit, and then a number of very prescriptive, and I won't go into specific actions related to safety, a transit intervention project, which we've already begun to kind of help address crime, the ability to actually issue civil citations for non-paying riders is really something that we've been looking to get for a number of years, and all that was accomplished. So I'm really thrilled. But we're not here for that. I just wanted to kind of set the table and jump into our agenda. And first, we're going to hear from the Community and Business Advisory Committee report. And I think that's Ianni and Laurie, but maybe I ask co-chair Laurie Malone, who's going to provide us with an update. Is that, do I have that right,
You
Laurie?
certainly do. Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. So I actually have Liz was nice enough to provide some bullet points. I didn't have a chance to take notes during that meeting, but some good progress. The project team shared information and answered questions are on the RMS phase 1 and phase 2, as well as the Arcade Street station designs. The committee had a lot of questions regarding the redesign of White Bear Avenue for safety and traffic concerns, but overall, it's positive support for evaluating the Maryland and White Bear Avenue route. The committee reiterated the importance of translated and accessible materials. We discussed safety issues like snow removal and traffic congestion for increased considerations for accessibility, and provided a number of ideas and connections to businesses, community community organizations, and multifamily housing complexes on Maryland and White Bear Avenue, so that to share with the team for outreach and engagement.
Great. Thanks, Laurie.
Welcome.
And I really appreciate that update and that you've been meeting and engaged. I just will pause for a minute to see if there's any questions or comments for Laurie. All right, hearing none, maybe let's jump into our community outreach and engagement report by our tremendous lead, Liz Jones. I see you, Liz. So you'll report on what we've been doing.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I'm just going to give a little overview of some of the engagement events and activities that we have held over the past month. So we, for the months of May and June, really focused on doing some reporting back to the communities in St. Paul about Arcade, but then really kind of focused that general information and awareness that we are starting to look at White Bear Avenue. So just really getting out into predominantly the White Bear Avenue area, and also, still visiting with folks along the Bruce Vento Trail. So throughout kind of the mid to late May through the mid to late June timeframe, as you can see on this slide and the next slide, we have attended a number of farmers markets, libraries. There's an adult ESL program that we have been visiting regularly. That's been super helpful to connect with folks. Some of our bus routes, so the routes 80, 64, 54, that is primarily in this area. And also some canvassing along businesses and residents in the White Bear Avenue area and the Bruce Vento Trail area as well, just to really, again, build that awareness with folks and let folks know that we are looking at White Bear Avenue, and that Bruce Vento Trail is still on the table, but really just spreading that information on where we are at with the project. So with these, we did have events earlier in May, and I'll just note that with these events in the last 4 weeks alone, if you go back to the previous slide, there's not a number, sorry, the next slide. Thank you. Filling in the number 21 on the 23rd there, so I did count. So within 4 weeks, that's 316 folks in person. And it's certainly not an exhaustive list of other connections and conversations via phone, email, et cetera, that the team has had. So that's really great. And the next slide, high level, this is kind of our top areas that we're chatting with folks about. So safety and security on our transit system as a whole, kind of how folks travel and utilize the Bruce Vento Trail and the White Bear Avenue areas, existing conditions of White Bear Avenue and Bruce Vento Trail, kind of similar to how folks travel and utilize and the conditions of these areas, transit feedback and frequency and reliability of existing routes. So next slide, please. This is just some more details on what we heard. A lot of similar themes again came through, a lot of excitement from folks and support that we are looking at the Maryland and White Bear Avenue areas. There's still been a handful of folks who prefer the Bruce Vento Trail, but really primarily supportive for White Bear Avenue. There are, of course, and we don't have advanced design, but lots of questions on how this will actually work and look along White Bear Avenue. There's a lot of safety concerns, traffic congestion concerns, business access for how we design along this corridor here. There's folks existed kind of poor conditions of White Bear Avenue as it exists currently, and just really reiterated that safety also exacerbated accessibility and snow removal and all of those topics as well. Overall safety on transit of our existing bus and light rail system. So we were able to share a lot of information with folks about Metro Transit Safety and Security Action Plan and some of the legislative efforts that the chair mentioned earlier in the meeting on how Metro Transit is addressing and partnering with community groups and organizations to help ensure we do have a safe transit system. Also, there's a lot of questions about some existing routes that do serve this area and Wiper Avenue and connect to other areas like the 80, the 64, and the 54, and how will those routes change? Will they go away? What will that look like? And we don't have answers to those questions yet, but it's something that we are paying attention to and want to make sure that we get those answered as much as we can as we go throughout this process. And this next slide just shows some of the events that we have coming up in the next month or so. So again, more pop-ups and community events going on. We've been visiting the Ramsey County Service Center a lot. That's been a great way to connect with folks. So downtown St. Paul here in our project office building, conveniently enough, as well as there are service center folks popping up in the Maplewood Mall. So that's been great to connect with folks there as well. Other community events throughout the corridor, and just looking forward to chatting with more folks throughout this summer and fall about Wiper Avenue. And as we continue to kind of advance design in these conversations, getting those feedback to help figure out where our stations will actually be. And later in the presentation here, I will talk a little bit more about specifically through this July, August, September timeframe, once we do have a little bit more information and start to kind of inch forward on painting this picture on what this route might look like. I'll be going through some information on how we will be connecting with folks and opportunity to get some ideas and additional feedback from you today. This is all that I have for now, unless there are any questions for me right away.
Any questions for Liz? All right, great. Thanks, Liz. And I know we'll hear more from you later. Now we're going to move on to our project manager, Craig Lamothe, who will take us through the schedule and work plan on the Phase 2 BRT modification study. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. So I'll spend the next about 35 minutes walking through slides that really lay out the work that we're just embarking upon here. We started some of it in earnest in May and June on some select activities, but it will be really underway in full force in July. And as you'll see into the schedule, it will not be a short period of work. We have a lot before us, and it's going to take us some time to get through it all. So the last time this group met in early April, we were just coming off the heels of a Ramsey County letter to the city of Maplewood that pointed us in the direction of looking at whether Purple Line could be accommodated on Maryland and White Bear Avenue. And this body acted to give its concurrence to study the feasibility of modifying the Purple Line to operate on Maryland and White Bear Avenue in dedicated lanes with lane reconfiguration, which means staying generally within the existing public right-of-way and reducing existing vehicular lane capacity to provide for those dedicated transit lanes. The goal of this phase of work is to develop and evaluate this new routing alternative up to a level of information sufficient to allow folks like yourselves as our corridor management committee to make an informed decision on whether or not Purple Line should be in the White Bear Maryland Avenue corridor, or whether it should be co-located with the Bruce Vento Regional Trail in the former freight rail corridor. So what we are now just embarking upon is really focusing time and energy on the thick, lighter purple line representing Maryland Avenue, and then operating on White Bear Avenue up to the transit center in the North End district of Maplewood. That'll be our focus to see if we can make that feasible and that be federally viable for future federal funds. We will look at potential extensions of that route alignment if we're able to show first it can function along Maryland up to White Bear to the transit center. So we may look at extensions to Vadnais Heights or Century College like the previous phase, but those discussions are much further off right now. One thing to note is we will have a lot of coordination with a lot of individuals, but one thing to note for this group, part of our metro network build out of building the rapid transit system includes an H-line. H-line bus rapid transit project that would be on Maryland Avenue. So we would share that segment shown here on the map on Maryland with Purple Line. We are not talking about a different project. We're talking about a different route alignment for the same project. So this project's purpose and needs still hold true, even though we are looking at a corridor that is about a mile to the east of the Bruce Vento Trail corridor. And we're focusing really on the long-term needs. And we're focusing on folks who rely on transit, folks who are demanding reliable high-frequency transit, which is something we have seen even more of coming out of the pandemic as the system has been rebounding. That's what people are looking for. And then a project that supports the growth and development of the corridor and in the end provides more options to folks for traveling to get to where they want to go. We spent really after this group met in early April, the rest of the month of April and into May, working with our project partners on developing the scope for this phase of work that you'll see in the subsequent slides, really working within Metro Transit, several different departments, working with Ramsey County Public Works that owns Maryland and White Bear Avenues, working with Maplewood, specifically Public Works staff and community development staff, but we were also up there in a workshop with City Council and the Mayor earlier this month, and then also working with staff from St. Paul, both Public Works and Planning and Economic Development. Part of developing the scope for this phase of work was also starting to develop what are the challenges that we're going to have to address in order to make Purple Line work on Maryland and White Bear Avenue. And there are a lot of things that we're going to need to explore over quite a period of time. Some of it which is related to repurposing the lanes on White Bear Avenue. So considering the right-of-way space and what wants to be there, we have on-street parking on Maryland Avenue. White Bear Avenue goes under Highway 36, which is a different situation than the Bruce Vento Trail corridor where we're going to build a new bridge over Highway 36. And then the level of reconstruction, how much of White Bear and Maryland Avenues are we reconstructing as part of this project? I'll get a little bit on later in the slide presentation, but traffic is a big component of it. There's a lot going on Maryland and White Bear Avenue today, and so there'll be a significant traffic study that will take more than a half a year to complete. Property access impacts. We'll be coming to really talk about the existing condition and what does the corridor look like in our next CMC meeting in September. But there are a lot of property access points along White Bear Avenue, a lot of driveways, a lot of alleys, a lot of business driveways. We'll also be looking at having to explore guideway. So the BRT dedicated lanes, what does that look like? Are they outside, inside? How wide are they? How do they interact with the roadway and the uses along the corridor? Also going to have to take into some consideration of station locations. So even if, which will be a topic for the next quarter management committee meeting of potential proposed station locations for Purple Line on Maryland and White Bear Avenue. Even if the end result is that we're replacing the Route 54 stops with Purple Line stations, those stops right now today, sometimes they're not much more than a bus stop sign. Sometimes they might have a shelter. In almost all cases, they're near side, and BRT stations want to be far side. So there's a lot of impacts at where those stations want to be that we're going to have to work through. And we may need property beyond the existing public right-of-way to be able to accommodate that at those locations. Also, I mentioned earlier coordination with the H-line, but also the Route 64 and 80 run on here as well. And then this is not just a transit project. This is a roadway reconstruction project to accommodate a transit project. So we need to address pedestrian bicycle facilities, including safety, as well as streetscape and other existing and planned facilities. This phase of work can be best encapsulated by these 6 planks that I'll talk a little bit more about in subsequent slides. And really, we're starting with getting ourselves an understanding of the corridor, what's out there today, how does the corridor function? With that basis of understanding, we're then able to develop options for how do we accommodate dedicated transit on Maryland and White Bear Avenues. Then ultimately, we develop full layouts end-to-end of what dedicated transit might look like, possibly getting down to maybe 3 to 4 most promising design options. And then ultimately from there, getting to a point of a preferred design option after much evaluation and much public input. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this as well. We do need to compare back to the Bruce Vento co-location route alternative after we've developed the White Bear, Maryland route alternative. And then ultimately, after that comparison is made, particularly of the trade-offs, and there will be trade-offs, there'll be pros and cons between the 2 different route alternatives, ultimately getting to a revised locally preferred alternative. So I want to spend just a real quick moment on why are we still talking about the co-location of the Bruce Vento Regional Trail when what we've heard that has led us to exploring Purple Line and being on Maryland and White Bear Avenues. Why are we not just focusing our time and attention there? And that is because the project on record with the federal government, both from an environmental standpoint and other aspects, is the locally preferred alternative that was selected back in 2017, which is Purple Line co-located with Bruce Vento Trail in the former freight rail corridor. And so we're going to need to make sure we are being compliant with the state and federal environmental processes and not doing anything in violation of those processes. And so if ultimately we end up with a Maryland White Bear Avenue that we want to proceed forward with after this phase of work, we will need to supplement all of the environmental work that was done in 2020 and 2021 to reflect that new project. That'll take about 12 months to complete. Much of the work that's going to be done in this phase of work will be the foundation for that environmental document in the next phase of work. This corridor in many aspects is a lot more complicated than the previous corridor. There is a lot going on in this urban street corridor. There are a lot of inputs that are going to be needed to be able to make informed decisions. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a traffic study that will look at all modes of travel within the corridor and what is going to happen to traffic as a result of lane reduction and dedicated transit lanes. Cost estimating will be big for both this new alternative, which we know very little about right now. And I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation when we're going to know more information about cost and ridership. But we will also, in order to make that comparison that I mentioned in the previous slide, we are going to have to refresh all of the work previously done because it will be stale by the time we want to make the point of comparison between the Bruce Vento Trail and a White Bear option. So we'll need to refresh the cost, the ridership, and the federal viability, or what is known as the project rating. Ridership analysis, different than what we had done with the previous phase of work, because now we will have the tools to be able to do it correctly and appropriately. Is the work that we'll be doing with this phase of work will be a true post-pandemic ridership condition. And so we have the benefits of an onboard survey done by Met Council on the transit system last year. That data will be available for modeling purposes. There's a major effort right now by Metro Transit called Network Now that really looks at what does the transit system want to be coming out of the pandemic in the near term, basically out to 2027, which is before we'd have Purple Line implemented. So when those results are known, we will factor that all into the work that we're doing here for Purple Line as well. And then lastly, this program's been around for now almost a half a century, this federal program, and it has gone through much change over that course of that time, but change oftentimes is slow and intermittent. But the federal government right now is anticipating that they'll make the biggest change that we've seen to this federal program in the last decade. And then we expect new guidance to be issued late fall, early winter of this year that will potentially change the way the federal government evaluates and rates these projects. Having ridership and cost alone only tells part of the story. We need to understand how the federal government will view this project with those new rating and evaluation criteria. So we'll need to be patient and wait until that new information is available. So a little bit more about those planks. That first plank, existing characteristics and quarter characteristics and conditions. This is what our focus is right now. This is what we would anticipate bringing to you as one of the items for your next quarter management committee meeting in early September. And this is really just sharing our understanding of the corridor. And this corridor, we've already learned, is very dynamic. It has a lot of variability to it, very little commonality with it. The land uses are different along the corridor. The width of the right-of-way is different. There's in some cases alleys, so very few access points, and then other times that there are individual driveways with mailboxes, with garbage pickup along certain segments. So very, very different depending on what part of the corridor we're in. So we'll be able to share that with you in September. With that knowledge, that will allow us to start developing cross sections of how to accommodate dedicated transit in the different segments of the corridor. And we'll be starting to do that here later this summer, really looking at, is the transit in the center? Is it center running, or is it side running, or is it a mix? Are there certain segments that we're just going to have to be in mixed traffic because the right-of-way is so constrained? Those are all things that we'll need to be working on summer through fall timeframe. And addressing the things that I mentioned earlier, we know that this has one of the worst safety ratings of any corridor in the Ramsey County roadway system. And so we're going to need to address things like that as well. And then ultimately, through that process, as we develop layouts for different segments of the corridor, we'll ultimately get to a point of having maybe 3 to 4 most promising alternatives. And we'll bring that forward to you as well once we have that. And I'll talk a little bit about that here subsequently. But ultimately, from those 3 to 4 that we would deeply technically evaluate from every angle, as well as seek deep public feedback on, we would eventually wind up with a recommendation for a preferred roadway layout for Maryland and White Bear Avenues after we have the benefit of all the technical information and all of the public feedback. And as I mentioned earlier, once we get to that point of having that preferred layout for White Bear Avenue alternative, we will then go back and refresh the Bruce Vento Trail corridor from a ridership cost and rating standpoint. So then we are able to compare apples to apples between the two corridors. There will be pros and cons with each of the two corridors. I don't know that there's going to be 100% silver bullet with one or the other. And so there'll need to be conversation to be had when we get to the point of comparison. And ultimately, we're hoping coming out of that comparison, there could be a recommendation from this body and other bodies like the Corridor Community and Business Advisory Committee on a revised locally preferred alternative. Where does the project want to be? Where should it be from the perspective of the community and what's best for the transit system? I've covered quite a bit, but I think this is important to share with the Corridor Management Committee, particularly the upper part of this schedule graphic. This kind of gives you an idea of when we're going to be coming to you if we adhere to the schedule we have laid out for this work plan. Up in that upper left with that gold star, that's where we are today with this meeting. So we're here to share the work plan and the schedule for that work. Represented in this graphic. I had alluded to earlier that we are anticipating coming back to you in September, so we'll give you July and August off. In September, we would plan to come with proposed potential station locations for Maryland and White Bear Avenue, seeking your concurrence that those are the right locations for Purple Line stations. That would be after we have the benefit of developing our recommendation through the technical information and going out to talk to the public about those potential station locations. So we'll do all of that before we come back to you in September. In September, we'll bring you the technical information and we'll share with you what we are hearing from the public on those proposed potential station locations. About a month later, we'd come back to preview. So not for action, but for information, preview the most promising design concepts. So we will, behind the scenes over the course of the summer, develop a universe of alternatives, a big bucket of different ways to lay out the roadway. We'll screen out the ones that just don't make sense using a process and criteria through our project partners and stakeholders. And then we'll hopefully get down to maybe 3 to 4 that we think have promise. And we would like to preview those in October with you. Then from that point, we would spend about 4 months deeply analyzing those 3 to 4 options technically, and spending 3 to 4 months talking to the public about those 3 to 4 alternatives and seeing what they think. Ultimately coming back to you for action in March on a preferred concept with the benefit of all that technical information and 4 months of public feedback. Then we'd let that kind of simmer and come back in April, a month later, with refreshed metrics for the Bruce Vento Trail co-location alternative. And then you'd have the benefit of being able to compare one to the other. That's also at the time if there wants to be a conversation about looking at a potential extension of a White Bear Avenue alternative further to the north. We could do that as well, and that's what's indicated by that northern endpoint icon in June. We could come back in June with information about potentially extending it to Vadnais Heights or Century College, depending on what the Corridor Management Committee might want us to look at. That's all on the assumption that we can make something on White Bear Avenue and Maryland Avenue work to the Maplewood Mall Transit Center. And then lastly, next September, after next Labor Day, so not this year, we would come back with the benefit of having spent next summer talking to the public about the comparison between the 2 route alternatives and getting their feedback and bringing to you that feedback from the public, having this committee and the Community and Business Advisory Committee before that make a recommendation on where Purple Line would want to be. Kind of already covered everything else below that top line. That's a lot of the work. I think maybe the biggest thing to point out, 2 things. First, we are not going to have ridership or costs represented by those pinkish icons here until, as you see here, after the holidays. So don't expect us to be bringing any of that. We won't have that information to share. We're going to focus on allowing other metrics, mostly community-driven metrics, drive the alternatives that make the most sense for us to evaluate. And ridership and cost will ultimately be part of that evaluation, but at the tail end. We are also trying our best to set this project up ultimately for success. And so if the decision is made that White Bear Avenue is where Purple Line wants to be, we need to have a 15% level of design for White Bear Avenue to be able to pivot into the environmental process that would start immediately after a decision on a revised locally preferred alternative. So our project team will make that assumption ahead of time, and because we're going to need to schedule-wise, we will be developing starting in February, advancing White Bear Avenue up to a 15% level of design, which is required for environmental analysis, and we'd have that done by about this time next year. And as you note down bottom, we're planning on, as was indicated, we have already been since the beginning of May, out in the community multiple times a week, engaging with hundreds of folks, and we'll continue to do that over the course of this entire phase of work. There'll be points in time where we'll be asking them very specific things, like coming up here most recently in July and August. What do they think of the proposed potential station locations? And then eventually later on about the 3 to 4 most promising concepts, and then later on comparison to the White Bear Avenue and Bruce Vento Trail. So we sent out the PowerPoint and agenda ahead of time. This time, the PowerPoint usually doesn't go out because we have some embedded questions in here. Most of them are in the area that Liz is going to cover after I complete my section, but here's the first one. We've been asking this question of others. We are now looking at, as I mentioned, a corridor that's a mile to the east of the previous corridor. We recognize that we're maybe not hearing from all the voices we need to hear from. And so as it relates to the Community and Business Advisory Committee, we would like to supplement that committee with individuals representing business and residential interests along the White Bear Avenue corridor. So hopefully with that advanced PowerPoint earlier this week, maybe some of you have recommendations for the project team. If you know individuals who fit the mold of business interests or residential interests, we would love to hear from you now. We also would welcome that feedback after this meeting if you haven't had a chance to think about that question. So I will pause and see if there's any feedback, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Craig. You got a big year ahead of you. We do. Any questions for Craig? Comments?
Councilmember Yang has her hand up.
I see. Go ahead, Councilmember Yang.
So much, Chair. And Craig, I want to say thank you to you for such a thorough presentation. I feel like you answered really all of the questions that were coming up for me around process and timeline too. I did have a question basically around what type of community engagement would be happening with the businesses in the, for example, the Hillcrest Shopping Center. I know many of them are really eager to get involved in this too. And so some of the groups that come to mind right away for me, it's the East Side Area Business Association, White Bear Avenue Business Association. So I feel like those are two really great organizations to go to directly for any like business folks who may be interested in joining a part of the community engagement work here. But I'm happy to send some names, send some more names along to you too. But I think overall, just like thanks so much for having such a well-drafted plan to share with all of us about the next steps moving forward.
Thank you, Council Member, and thank you for those recommendations. Have been getting feedback like that, and Liz will be going through identification of some of those groups we're aware of already or have been engaging with, and we want to make sure all those holes are filled because we don't want to miss anybody. And I know the White Bear Avenue Business Association, I believe we have a meeting coming up with them, and I know we are already connected to Paris Dunning on the East Side Business Association as well. But any names you can share, that would be wonderful. We have two more hands up, Mr. Chair. I see Councilmember Vento and Ianni, and I didn't pay attention to who had theirs up first.
Oh, I missed that. Go ahead, Councilmember Vento, and then Ianni.
I'll be quick. Thank you. I'd like to recommend, being the daughter and granddaughter of grocers, I'd like to recommend the grocery stores and meat markets and other settings like that. I would imagine that there are some employees who would find the bus service very beneficial. So I think, and there are a number of them along White Bear Avenue. I'm also curious, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm also curious if anybody knows what the plans are for the Ramsey County nursing home on White Bear, and whether or not there are any plans that might help shape the thinking and planning on this project. Commissioner Reinhardt might be able to help us with that.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
And I don't have a lot. I mean, we can look into it and go from there, but I don't have anything at this point to add.
I think the only thing I can speak to, Councilmember Vento, is that we're aware on that east side, in that segment, there is a lot of Ramsey County owned property, a lot of it that is very active today, some with potential opportunity for redevelopment. And I know that there's one facility that the name escapes me, is supposed to be reopening with over 100 beds. That's near the Frost intersection, and I think that's upcoming yet this year to be reopened. But we're starting to track some of that. We're also along those lines utilizing our station area planning efforts to start having conversations with both cities and the county about Purple Line's never been envisioned to be on White Bear Avenue. So how might they approach redevelopment or development differently through their comprehensive planning process to help maybe put more affordable housing or more density along White Bear Avenue than maybe they previously thought about because it wasn't supposed to have a BRT line on it.
Good
And I
comments.
guess really what it comes down to is, and you're absolutely right, Craig, but there's not only is there a lot of rethinking and a lot of work going into what we have to do for Purple Line, but all of the Ramsey County roads and projects and plans are also kind of, stop, let's look at this and see what we need to do and what is going to impact and what is the benefit going to be, because it appears, when you just look at it from, I don't know how many, a long out view anyhow, that there's a lot of opportunity, but we just need to make sure that we're planning it correctly and not just going forward without rethinking it, just as we're doing on Purple Line. There's a lot of opportunity, but we need to make sure that we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Victoria. And Ianni, here you are. You had a question.
Yes, not so much a question. I dropped it in the chat. We are doing some engagement tonight at Hillcrest regarding the Purple Line, and Asaba, Payne Phelan, District 2 Council, Greater Eastside, Wababa, and Micah are all going to be in attendance, and inviting you all, if you haven't gotten an invite, at 6:30. Get some community thoughts and engagement started as to moving this forward.
Hey, thank you very much for the invitation, and the address is in the chat. And thank you for co-chairing the Community and Business Advisory Committee, and that these events really a great way to kind of engage with community. Any other questions? Oh, I see, Councilmember Yang. Or maybe your hand is still up.
Nope, I don't have my hand up.
Okay.
Hi.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, sorry, Winona. There it is. I was getting the name right.
I'm Commissioner Zhang's aide. I'm also a resident of St. Paul. Grew up going down White Bear and, right by Bruce Vento. I'm thinking about how when the light rail came through University, a lot of businesses were impacted during construction and after it was built. And maybe it might be a little too early to ask this, but do we have a plan, or has there been any discussions about how we can support those businesses during and after construction? Like during construction, there's going to be issues with people getting access to those businesses there, and then after the build of, or after the construction, there may be, businesses having issues dealing with like increased rent and those types of issues. Have we started having those conversations yet?
I will speak for the project. I think the chair and Councilmember Vento maybe will speak more broadly. For this phase of work on White Bear Avenue, we will be looking at a high level at what it means to construct Purple Line on White Bear and Maryland Avenue. And ultimately, if that's selected as the preferred route, we would spend much more time figuring out the constructability of that. So what does it mean for all the businesses and residents as we're building it out over the course of 2+ years? But I think generally we have a lot to draw upon from all the projects that have come before Purple Line in this area that Councilmember Vento and Chair Zelle may be able to speak, or Nick Thompson, better about.
Yeah, I defer to Nick Thompson, but I will mention we're developing a new division at Met Council, which is really to help provide greater support for these project teams and with both expertise and kind of cross collaboration to ensure that we're applying the learnings of various transit projects, and there are many, to how we can follow some best practice and get a better understanding of how we can deliver them effectively.
And apologize, I heard my name called. I was on an emergency call, so I didn't hear what the question was though. Or maybe the chair covered it.
I can kind of generally ask again. So I was just kind of curious if there have been conversations as to how we can support businesses. Whether we go on White Bear or not, but if we have a plan to support those businesses, if people have even been asking about that, concerned about their own businesses on White Bear, and how we're going to support businesses after White Bear is built. And it might be too early to ask these questions, but they're just what's on my mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's never too early because it's on their mind. I think we will be developing a plan for supporting both before construction, during construction, and then ideally in the long term, how businesses take advantage of this major investment. It is something we're trying to really we've done on the Green Line Central Corridor, but really we're trying to set up a new model for that on Blue Line Extension. I think that'll be which is a little bit ahead of Purple Line, and I think will be very a model that will work well for White Bear and if White Bear is a route or anywhere on Purple Line. So yes, we don't have a plan yet, but we have a plan to make a plan, and then definitely make sure that people are comfortable from a business that we're going to be there with them to make sure they can, stay well in business during construction and then thrive with this investment afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, last night at our council meeting, we had a great presentation, and it included some discussion about the B-line and the impact on businesses in the Selby area. And the staff and my council colleague, council member Tony Carter, described beautifully how the Met Transit staff, the project staff, have been working with those businesses to try and create signage and really have good communication. So we're well aware of the impact that this has on businesses, and everything that Nick said. All efforts are going to be made to help those businesses, especially post-pandemic. Everybody's been through enough, and we want to do what we can to the extent possible to reduce stress. The one thing about this project is we don't know for sure if it'll be White Bear Avenue, so you don't want to get too far ahead of yourselves on it. But there will be efforts, and to the extent that questions aren't being answered, our folks are curious, just direct them towards Liz and Craig and those of us who are on the council.
Well said. Thank you, Councilmember Vento. It's true. Any other questions or thoughts for Craig at this point?
I think we have Commissioner Zhang may have had her hand up, and I thought Liz Jones may have as well.
Yes, I did. I was just thinking about who else could be engaged, and just like right off the street there's the Iowa High Rise. It's the public housing, and they have I don't know how many units there, but then there are a lot of people there too that could be engaged because the corridor along White Bear there is it has a lot of businesses that many of the residents rely on in the neighborhood. So just getting their feedback would be really important. The other places that I was just thinking about, like these are some of the event centers in the community. One of them that is happening tonight is at Cups and Cheers. The other one is White Dragon Hall, and another one is Unison. So I was just thinking about that. Those are other places where either it's a tabling at or talking, having an event there for an open house would be important for getting feedback from the people who go there too.
Mr. Chair, that's all great feedback, and I think getting into a lot of what I think folks are going to hear from Liz in the last set of slides that we have, which is really our engagement plan for this next year and a half. Where do we think we want to be? Who do we want to be talking to? And are we missing anybody? So I know that folks are going to be interested in hearing from Liz. And as such, I maybe will make one more comment as it relates to J-Lor's question. So we do recognize that the Bruce Vento Trail Corridor, people's backyards were backing up to where the transit would have been. So we were dealing with the back doors of everybody, not the front doors. And so one of the things we do plan on to start that process of understanding what the needs are is we're going to be doing walking tours after Labor Day, after schools are back in session in the corridor, taking project staff out. So not just Liz Jones and the community outreach team going out, which is the typical way we do this, but we will actually be bringing the engineers and the planners and the landscape architects out into the corridor to walk and ride small, short segments of the corridor with business owners, with residential interests. So we hear, and the project designers hear directly from those business interests. So we understand whether businesses are taking deliveries from their front door that we need to figure out and accommodate in a redesign of the roadway.
Great, thanks, Craig. Any additional questions? Sorry, I'm not seeing all the hands as well as I should.
Councilmember Zhang may still have her hand up, or maybe re-put her hand up.
Okay. No,
I'm good, thank you.
You're good. Okay. Well, we've been talking about Liz's kind of with additional information on some of the outreach and engagement regarding the phase 2 study. So, Liz, maybe we should present that, and then we'll have some more conversation.
And I will flip to Liz's slides. I think I'm going to skip through a bunch of slides that are in all of your slide deck. Project staff decides if we're starting a new phase of work that we want to make sure everybody has a common understanding, because oftentimes we take things for granted because we've worked on several of these projects, and like this diagram, this purple diagram, this has been used on all the projects, and sometimes we take for granted that everybody knows what each of these little squares on this purple diagram means. So that's what you'll have in the next half dozen slides that I will not spend time on today. But if you have questions about what are these groups, who are on these groups, feel free to follow up with us afterwards. I'm going to turn it over to Liz, who's got way more interesting information than I do.
Don't sell that short.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Chair and committee members. All right, here we are. So like I mentioned and Craig mentioned, I'm just going to talk through a little bit more of some of our communications methods and what we're planning over these next few months here to engage folks during what we're calling the route modification study phase 2. And again, we've been getting some of that early engagement, and that will continue and throughout the rest of the summer, and just talking to folks and just getting overall feedback on existing conditions and how they live, work, and travel throughout the corridor. We are making sure that all of our materials and handouts and maps and all the visualizations that we have to share with folks to help communicate what we're doing and elicit feedback are up to par. So that varies from kind of general, what is the purple line, what is bus rapid transit, to here's a line on a map of what a purple line along Maryland and White Bear might look like. So we have boards, we have door hangers that we've already started to use. So those have been really great to reach, especially multifamily housing and single family homes, to hang just on a door. They're really usable and readable. We have translated door hangers as well. They direct folks to our website and just how to make sure they're getting engaged with us and know about the project, and that they'll be hearing more from us over this summer and throughout the life of this project. But again, having these materials at pop-up events, community spaces, we will be hosting some open houses, but we really try to focus on pop-up events and canvassing and leaving materials at community spaces. So we will have boards and maps that we can leave at libraries or community centers that allow us to leave takeaways for folks, so they can, grab a sheet or engage with a board, leave a Post-it note, so that stays in locations for a while. We connect with folks at existing bus stops and transit facilities. We have our kind of typical website, social media, newsletter updates. And again, all of these materials, we make sure that they're translated. And at certain events, for example, we go for specific events, we have folks who speak other languages with us, and that's always available as needed or and as requested as we're out in community. If we find that we're having language barriers, we can always pivot and make sure that we have the correct materials and folks to speak languages once we're out in community talking to folks. The next slide just talks a little bit more about this effort and utilizing these materials. And again, I talked already about our pop-up and community events. Craig mentioned corridor tours. So this fall, we will again be really getting out there in the area and asking folks to walk or use their mobility device for a short distance with us. Hopefully in September, we won't have 90-degree weather. So that's also, along with schools being back in session, why we kind of chose that time frame to really be out there and see and hear that feedback live and in person. But prior to that, again, we're kind of building up this base of information of what are broad opportunities, challenges, issues, questions, concerns throughout this corridor, narrowing those down to, a station location, bucket, larger circle, maybe smaller circle, to actually figure out where these stations want to be. So with all of our materials, we did just launch, and I'll put a link in the chat that I'm really excited about, an interactive map. So this will continue to live throughout the life of the project, and we can update it once we do decide on a new Purple Line route. We can add different surveys or other ways to connect with folks, but it's a nice way for folks to leave comments or questions on a map. We have some probing questions. So again, we will start to promote this. It just went live on our website. We have a newsletter that will promote this as well, and our translated materials will have QR codes and things like that, again, just to show how to engage with the project and leave feedback for folks maybe aren't able to come to an event or prefer to engage with us digitally. Some people prefer to do all the things, so just try to have as many mechanisms to connect with folks and elicit that feedback as we can. Another really important activity that we are going to be doing to connect with folks in the Maryland to White Bear Avenue is our canvassing. We've started to work on a kind of a business inventory survey. So we have created a list of just businesses in this quarter, and I want to say it's almost 200 just in this Maryland to White Bear Avenue. We of course have a really big list of other community organizations and businesses kind of throughout the Purple Line corridor that we connect with. Wanted to make sure that we were capturing everybody along Maryland to White Bear. We're going to go out and have a kind of a paper survey and hopefully talk to folks without interrupting their business operations, asking questions, like, are there existing barriers to the operations of your business? Examples might be poor lighting or sidewalk, traffic, public safety concerns, things like that. So we are going to have staff try to hit all of these businesses along this area and ask them these questions and provide them with just information on how they can engage with the project and this process. I'm looking forward to that as well. Of course, we'll continue our pop-ups and community events and connect with our community and business advisory committee and you all on this corridor management committee as well. And on the next slide, just talks a little bit more about kind of that effort to figure out where stations along Maryland and White Bear Avenue might be. Where once we get to the end of July, early to mid-August timeframe, we will have at least some circles on a map. They might be bigger circles in some places, they might be smaller circles in some, but that's kind of the first, I would say, gut check from the community on, are these generally reflective of the feedback we've received so far, and are we on the right track with how we might refine these general areas? So that really specific feedback will occur for those few weeks, but it's not the end all be all. Will continue throughout August and September, but it's really just wanting to make sure that we are, again, doing that gut check to make sure that we are on the right track with some of those station locations. So we will be hosting a few open houses and continuing pop-ups and our regular canvassing during this time as well. And of course, all of that will be shared with you folks to provide your input on as well. And we'll report back to you what we hear from the community. Are there any, I can pause if there are any questions on what I talked about in the last few slides here, or any other ideas or strategies for outreach and engagement that you are thinking of that you maybe didn't see on the slides or did not hear that reflected in what I just mentioned.
Any thoughts? Thanks, Liz. And any other strategies, I guess you're really asking us here. We have one comment in the chat from Councilmember Bento about Hillcrest Library.
I think Commissioner Zhang has her hand up too.
Commissioner Zhang, go ahead.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about like the engagement and where I've seen others do the engagement to make it accessible too is like even having like a phone line or a phone number where people can leave voice messages in their language, in their chosen language. I just think that you know, the written language in English is not always accessible, especially to our newer communities and immigrant communities in St. Paul here and along the along the corridor there. So that's just a thought and a question to see if we do have like lines where people can leave feedback.
Thank you, Commissioner Zhang. That's a really great idea. We don't have a specific phone line for the project. Aside from our individual kind of phone numbers where we chat with folks, we do have the ability to connect to translated services through our phone calls. But we don't have just kind of like a voicemail line where folks can just kind of leave general feedback, but I definitely am curious to look into that and see what that might look like. If you have any information or resources on that, that would be very helpful.
Great idea.
And I'll look more into what we have available here, what other projects might use, but might reach out to you in your office directly on that, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And these next few slides, I know we already have a lot of our first questions elicited a lot of really great feedback on locations and groups to connect with. So really, these next cadence of slides is just kind of a list of some, it's definitely not exhaustive, but there's certainly a lot of community spaces, community organizations, community groups, businesses, multifamily complexes and residence groups throughout the corridor. So we are just really asking help from you all, from others we've been talking to. We got a lot of great feedback from the Maplewood City Council a few weeks ago. We also received great feedback from our Community and Business Advisory Committee last week. So really just wanting to build our list and make sure that we are getting out there and sharing information with folks on how to engage with us during this effort as much as we can. So on this slide here, we talk about some specific events and then also some community organizations that host various events. So if there were any others that folks might have right away, I can pause.
And Councilmember Zhang.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's still up from last time.
Oh, I wasn't paying that close attention.
Any other thoughts?
And we can always go back to that. So the next slide is just a list of some new groups that we have received from folks that's really focused on this area here. So the YMCA's, again, some adult ESL classes at Harmony Learning Center that have been really helpful, visiting the churches and mosques. We do have a few grocery stores listed out, but I just noted that again, Councilmember Bento, always great to connect with folks where they are going, where they are at. So if there's any other groups folks can think of right away, I can pause again. And I see your chat, Councilmember Vento. I was wondering, I was like, oh, I haven't heard of Hillcrest Library, Hayden Heights Library. We've been there and we're continuing to go there throughout this process. So thanks for that note.
I'm also wondering about Mounds Park Academy, although it's not on White Bear Avenue, it's not a long walk, and whether there might be interest in terms of students or employees.
Great, thanks for that. And then this is just some more of the business groups. So I know we already talked about ESABA and one of my favorite acronyms, WABABA, White Bear Avenue Business Association. A lot of these we've already been talking to and will continue to engage with. CLUS, more of kind of a regional organization. Hmong Village, we go to a lot, but again, we have that Hy-Vee and the Cub listed, Maplewood Mall, of course, and our folks at St. John's and the Birchman Shopping Center, other businesses in this area. I know we talked about Hillcrest Shopping Center, of course, the Chambers. If there's any other business groups folks have, we can pause. Costco, I'll add that to the list. I know we've chatted with them a little bit for the previous alignment, but yet they're still definitely still relevant.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang has her hand up.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Councilmember.
Yeah, Liz, one thing I wanted to mention to you too is that because we have such a large population of Karen folks in the East Side, reaching out to the Karen organization in Minnesota would be really important too. And I don't know exactly, like, they have a lot of different programs within the organization. Maybe there may even be like a business focus because there are Karen businesses in the East Side also. So I wanted to uplift that organization.
Excellent. I know we do have them on our list. Do you have, I can connect with you offline too if you have specific contacts.
Yes, I do. I can share that with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, and then this last group here, we've gotten really great feedback, and I know we have the Iowa high rise that was mentioned. Somebody first mentioned that at our CVAC meeting last week, so that was super helpful. A lot of multifamily housing, public housing, senior living in this area, so that's been really helpful to add to this list for us to connect with folks. A few of these complexes we've already chatted with folks at, and some are kind of closer to the Maplewood Mall area. But building that Maryland and White Bear Avenue area will be really helpful for us as well. So if there's other complexes or resident groups for the area, please, I can pause And of course, can always follow up with me after the meeting if other ideas come in. All right, well, thank you all. And again, if you think of others, please feel free to send those my way. And I will probably be reaching out to a few of you just for some contacts that you mentioned. So thank you so much for your help.
Thanks, Liz. And obviously, you're open for business to get a lot of feedback or ideas or suggestions as we ponder it during the day. Thanks so much for that. And it really is becoming very real now. And it's really helpful to see the breadth and the depth of all your activities. So I'm not sure if we have someone from the Maplewood City Council here. I haven't seen.
No, Mr. Chair, we do not have anybody from Maplewood or from White Bear Lake. All others we have since joined since the beginning of the meeting.
All right. Well, we were going to hear maybe a little bit about the fact that the Maplewood City Council had a city workshop to discuss the project. So I don't know if Craig, you want to give us an update how that went, or Liz, but we can wait and hear about it later.
And Commissioner Reinhardt's got her hand up. I'd be happy to go before or after Commissioner Reinhardt poses her question or comments.
Go ahead,
Well,
Victoria.
you could probably give more detail because I wasn't there, but all the information that I got from that was that it was a very positive, productive, let's move it forward, let's get the information we need, work session. And so it sounded like it went very well. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is it's my understanding that the White Bear Avenue Parade is going to take place in September sometime. I just heard that the other day. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because there might be some opportunities within that parade.
There you go.
Thanks.
Might be an opportunity for a bus.
Yes. All right, thanks.
There's never enough buses and parades, I always say.
Yeah, I will just echo Commissioner Reinhardt's report. So Colin and I went up there with Nick as well, and Stephen Smith, our deputy project manager. We're up on the 12th of June. We spent about an hour in a workshop format with the mayor and city council with the same questions that were asked by Liz of this group. We got a lot of great feedback. We knew going into it that we obviously didn't have everybody and we didn't have all the locations, and we wanted to get others' feedback. And the council gave us exactly that. I'll even note that we had sent out that PowerPoint ahead of time, and No Rush Line Coalition had gotten a hold of it, and actually at that meeting gave us a piece of paper that had suggestions for people that we should make sure we talk to and places we should visit. So that was helpful as well. And we are planning on being back up in front of the Maplewood City Council in August. We've been invited back to talk about potential proposed station locations. And I believe something is in the works to come before the organizational committee of the city of St. Paul in August as well, to give an update on the project.
Great. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everybody. And Liz, wonderful presentations. So I think at this point, we kind of open it up. We have just a few minutes. If anybody has any other project-related items that they'd like to share that hasn't been addressed so far. Well, hearing none, and I'm checking for hands. We have some meetings coming up, but not until September, October. It's not like we're taking the summer off. Boy, there's a lot going on, and I saw all those meetings, including one tonight. So I'm hoping we can stay connected. But in terms of formal CMC meetings. We're expecting to have ones in September and maybe even get back to a monthly schedule really from September to September 2024. We can always cancel a meeting if we don't have anything to be discussed, but it's always good to have something on the calendar. So we're going to try to do that. And in the meantime, there's so many ways to stay connected, either through social media, through emails, through the website. There it is, the website, metrotransit.org/Purple Line Project. Craig, well done. And it's so exciting to see this project take form and how it's progressed over this past year. And even though we're taking more time, we're truly becoming not just a transit, but as you say, a road and an economic development project. So with that, does anybody have anything that on any subject that they'd like to share on a beautiful afternoon? All right, hearing none, thank you all so very much for attending today. And we really look forward to the next phases, and we'll see you out in the area and some of those wonderful events. Stay well, and this meeting's adjourned. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.